We did some support shows here in Budapest before, and we also played Sziget Festival one year. That's like 5 years ago. Today we haven't really had time to go anywhere, but before we've been out sightseeing in Budapest, and yeah, always had a good time here. It all started with me and Jussi here. We started the band as teenagers back in '97.
Yeah.
And it started out just as a project. We were kind of bored kids and didn't have much to do. So we started a band and didn't really have any big plans or anything like that. We just started from zero, and then a bit later we got a drummer and a bass player and a keyboard player and more of a full lineup. And I think we started so from zero. It took us a long time before our debut didn't come out before 2004. But that's already 10 years ago, and ever since we've been touring and releasing more albums. Our most recent album came out last August, so that's our 4th album now. It's in Finnish mythology. Turisas is listed as a name of a war god in Finnish mythology. But Finnish mythology is pretty obscure because people didn't really know how to write down things. So I think it's pretty corrupt as well in the way that meanings have got changed meanings, and it's a bit mixed up. It's not as clear as, say, Greek mythology, where they were able to record everything down. So. Well, for instance, as a band, we've been highly inspired by the Kalevala. It's the Finnish national epic, and it's the first version has been published somewhere mid 19th century. So it's fairly young in that way, but it's old oral tradition, especially from the eastern regions of Finland, and that were collected in the time of nationalism and romantic ideas. And they went out and collected these stories from people who have been singing them from generation to passing them on orally from father to son, so to say. But yeah, the Kalevala as such, I guess, it has a pretty big meaning in Finland. You read it in school and so forth, but I don't think you can consider it. It also has a lot of this kind of nationalist and romantic idea around it, because it's still collected by one guy only. So he chose what to include and what to leave out and how to make the story kind of flow better. So it's not kind of a perfect how would you say, like a manuscript of Finnish mythology in that sense.
Well, I live in southern Finland, in Hämeenlinna, but most of the band now lives in Helsinki, which is where they are like really close to each other. It's like 1 hour away. So
yeah, we grew up in that town called Hämeenlinna, and that's where we started the band. I've been living in Helsinki now for probably 15 years almost, but it's still very close, and Jussi lives up there, and we used to even have our rehearsal room still in Hämeenlinna until a couple of years back, when now we are five out of 6 are based in Helsinki, so it's much easier to have our home base there. Well, people tend to say that it's because Finnish people are a bit, how do you put it, not depressed, but a bit more melancholic maybe than others, that metal do so well in Finland. I'm not 100% sure about that, to be honest, but yeah, metal is very mainstream in Finland. You listen to the radio, you can hear kind of hard rock and metal pretty frequently, and it makes, you know, our albums have been in the charts every time we release something, and I think it's kind of considered music just as any other type of music, because I guess in some other countries, like in South America, metal is still very kind of underground and marginal, and maybe not respected maybe by jazz musicians and so forth that much. But in Finland, you can definitely, we did some collaborations with a guy called Iiro Rantala, which is one of the biggest Finnish jazz pianists and stuff like that. So it's it's maybe more balanced in that way. But what the reason is hard to say. I think all the successful Finnish metal bands all have something very unique about them, and the bands tend to be kind of trying to create something new and not just redo what's been done in the past. I think that's the key to success in any music really, or even without music in business or whatever. You have to carve your own path and find your own thing. I think we've always tried to evolve album by album and not just repeat what we've done in the past, but find new ways to express ourselves. And on every album, we started more out as a band. We felt that we actually came from a black metal background, which sounds a bit funny now because we are kind of far apart from that extreme metal thing, but there's definitely, that's where our roots are still musically, and then we just brought in more and more influences. We used to have even more folk influence with accordion and more acoustic violin, and I think by now the violin has more evolved to some sort of a lead guitar, so there's a lot of effects on the violin, and we use it more in that direction than just a folk instrument really. Depending a bit on the album, I think the symphonic parts play a big role in our music, a lot of orchestration and stuff like that. On the latest album, Turisas 2013, we wanted to kind of strip it down a bit and not make it so big as our previous albums have been, and it's kind of more straightforward in that sense. And I think it's important that every album we kind of challenge ourselves and try to find a new way to do things rather than just keep the same thing going and playing it safe. So it's always a risk, but I think by risking it you're able to come up with something new creatively.
Well, I think that's kind of one of our kind of key points also in mind of audience, since I think a lot of people are kind of interested to hear how violin sounds in metal music or accordion on the previous albums. So I think for us it's been really a good thing in a way. Maybe getting a broader audience in that way also, but I think it's been pretty good in that sense.
When we started the band, we never planned that let's do face paint and let's have these costumes and everything, but it started out from the thing that we were very much into black metal when the bands were still doing the black and white kind of black metal face paint and everything, and we wanted to keep that same visual aspect to our band, but we realized that our music is already then was different and not so dark, but more kind of down to earth in a way. So instead of having that, we wanted to just have some small splatters of blood and maybe some dirt on our face, and that's where we started out. But then when we started touring, every night there was someone who put a little bit more, and next night someone put a little bit more, so it kind of gradually grew to where it is now. And since then, now it would be very hard to imagine that we would go on stage and play like this, because it's such a big part of the whole thing. On the previous albums, I've written most of the music and also all the lyrics, but like for instance our recent album Jussi here and our violin player Olli has also contributed to songs. We've written some stuff together, and I guess that's a direction for the future as well, to more and more involve everybody in the band for the writing process. But I think it kind of works the way that the guys submit ideas, maybe small pieces here and there, and then I take them and arrange them around a bit, and we work on them together. But it kind of goes through me in the end process. But like on the last album, we were recording a lot by ourselves because we wanted to kind of get out of the studio environment. So we rented this big old house in the middle of the forest and set up our own recording gear there. So especially me and Jussi were really closely working because we were tracking everything ourselves and doing a lot of the work by ourselves. So we were kind of all the time going through all the ideas together, basically. I think irony is a big part of our music and what we do, and of course we are serious about what we do, and the show is serious, but at the same time we are there to have a good time on stage as well. And I think that's a big part of the show. I think the audience can really tell that the band enjoys being on stage and can laugh at ourselves as well. And I think that's what you need. If you try to be too safe and too much in your comfort zone, it's going to get a bit boring. So you have to kind of go a bit over the top with things for it to get interesting for the audience. But I also think that in things like in our lyrics and stuff like this, irony plays kind of a big role, and sometimes I write from kind of an opposite perspective than my own. So if I have one opinion, I write from the opposite opinion, the lyrics, and that's sometimes a bit difficult because people don't always maybe or understand who is me personally and who is the storyteller persona in the songs, for instance. It actually started the idea came up very early in our career. It was back in 2000 or 2001 or something like this. There's this ferry that runs between Helsinki and Stockholm, so you have to go overnight, and it's a kind of a big party boat. People get very drunk, and there's bands playing and cheap alcohol. And so I had to take that boat just to travel over to Sweden by myself, and it was a bit boring. I was sitting there, and there was this 70s disco cover band playing on the boat, and then they played that song, and I just realized that this would work pretty well as a cover, because there's a lot of choirs in our music, a lot of group singing and group vocals, and it kind of had everything that would make a good Turisas song out of it. But it wasn't until, I think, after our debut came out in 2004, when we started doing shows. Already on that one, we did some headline shows and had only one album to play, so we had to come up with more material to put in the set to play a full 90-minute set. So so then I remembered this idea that, hey, how about covering Rasputin? And it started out as a live track, and people went just completely crazy when we played it live. So then later on we recorded it as well.
Well, hopefully the band keep growing, and we can continue on this career, which I definitely love to do. I love touring, and I hope we get some more success and can be touring even in a bigger circles at that point. Well, yeah, hopefully releasing more albums also.
Yeah, I mean the whole music business is a bit. Sometimes I think that it's the worst timing ever to be born and starting a band and working with a band right now, when as soon as we released our debut album, since then the whole music business has been turning over many times, and things have come up like digital and YouTube and all these things, and I'm pretty confident that sooner or later there will be some sort of a model that makes sense for the consumer and makes sense for the musicians and makes sense for everybody involved in the music business. But it's been kind of tough being in just that time when the old system is clearly behind us and the new system hasn't really found its place yet completely. So I hope we get to continue our career to the point where it maybe stabilizes a bit and there's a better system for everybody to be able to make art, make music, whatever, and still be able to support yourself and be able to tour and be able to make a living out of it, basically. In general, yeah, you can tell that the more south you go, like in Spain and Italy, the crowds are pretty wild, but there were really good shows in France. England and the UK has always been a very strong market for us, and people there like to drink and party a lot, so the shows are usually pretty crazy in England as well. We did our first South American tour last year. Yeah. And that was really an amazing experience because people were singing in the audience all the time, and it's definitely more energetic. But I think at our shows, the people or the crowds are pretty lively wherever we go, so the difference are not that big. It's just a smaller thing you notice. It's more like the whole touring life is very different. Like in Europe, you arrive in Budapest in the morning and you have all day you can go out and there's a city and there's all this culture and all these things you can do. But when you are in the US, for instance, it's just a lot of driving and parking lots and malls and there's not so much to see. So it's a bit more, I think it's much easier to tour in Europe, and it's much more, every day there's a different country maybe and a different city and a different culture and different food and different new things to see and try. And in that way, if you have a very long tour in the US, it might get a bit heavy in the end.